everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing a very exciting video, which is my best books of the year for 2022. Last year I had a pretty good reading year. I had a much higher average rating. I read fewer books, but I really liked a lot of the stuff that I was reading. I didn't really find any new all-time favorite books, but I read some really great stuff and some books that I am excited to chat with you about. So I have 6 books here. 2 of them are rereads, so maybe more like honorable mentions, but I loved them and I wanted to include them in this. So let's just dive into my best books of the year. I have split these into 2 sections because the HarperCollins union is still on strike, which is wild. It has been 2 months now since they started this strike for a living wage, and they just have very reasonable demands, and yet it is still ongoing. So for the most part, they have been asking reviewers to hold off on reviewing any HarperCollins imprint books. However, they have said that for end of year wrap-ups, like best of lists, that it's okay if people still include HarperCollins books in those lists, but to please mention the strike and ways to support them, which is what I'm doing here. So I have 3 books that are from HarperCollins imprints, but wanted to mention that the strike is still going on and is really important, and in the description there are links to the union's social media accounts and different ways to support them. There are lots of different ways that you can support the union as they're on strike, so please do check those out. All of these books that are from HarperCollins imprints are also ones that I have reviewed earlier in the year, and I have review videos, so I'll link those in the description. I am not gonna go super in depth with these right now, but I did want to mention them. Okay, so let's get started. I'm gonna start with the reread from this category, which is The Binding by Bridget Collins. This I read for the first time, I think, in 2019. It was a book that I just became obsessed with the first time I read it, and this was my first time rereading it, so I was a little bit nervous to reread it, but I loved my reread of this. It was very different feeling in some ways, but there is something about this book that just always lands right for me. It is a very melancholy and in many ways tragic story, so it's not like a fun romp type of story. It is very slow, very atmospheric, more reflective, and as I said, very melancholy in tone, but I loved it a second time around, so I'm really glad that I reread it. All right, then my next, onto some books that I read for the first time this year, one of which is maybe a surprise. Some of these are maybe surprises to me. The first one is Fool's Assassin by Robin Hobb. It's always surprising to me if a Hobb book gets onto my favorites of the year list, just because I often have very mixed feelings about them. While I do enjoy her books, I just have very mixed feelings a lot of times, but this is the first book in the final trilogy, and this may be my favorite single book in all of the realm of the Elderlings. Although I did love Mad Ship also, but what I love so much about this one is that it is much lower in plot. It is very slow, it's much more domestic, and is really focused on following Fitz's family and more like the domestic dramas of their lives. We also get a second perspective in this book, which I love for multiple reasons. One, just having any perspective other than Fitz is great to me, but also this new perspective is my favorite character in the entire realm of the Elderlings, and this had so little plot, it just worked so well for me. And then my last one in this category is Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty, which was also a bit of a surprise for me. So this is the second book in the Devabad trilogy. I had read the first book maybe a year or 2 ago, and I thought it was okay, but I wasn't that into it, and I really only continued on with the series because someone had given me the second book, so I was like, may as well, I own it. And then I ended up loving this. The first half of it was slow going, but the second half was so good that it made up for it. What I love most about this series is how well S.A. Chakraborty lets you understand everybody's perspective. We're following multiple characters on different sides of a conflict in this world between different groups of people. It becomes both very politically and emotionally complicated for the characters and therefore the readers. Also, the main character in this is a healer, and like, you can't go wrong with a healer in a book for me. I love healers. All right, so those are the 3 books that are all part of HarperCollins imprints, and just reminder that in the description there are links to the union's social media accounts, different ways to support them, so please do check those out. Okay, then on to the other 3 of my favorite books of the year, which are from other publishers. So again, we're gonna start with my reread, which was actually the first book that I read in 2022, which is The Dark Mirror by Juliet Marillier. This is another one where I read the whole trilogy. I reread the whole trilogy in 2022, and I loved the whole trilogy, but this first one is really my favorite. So this is the first book in the Breedy Chronicles, which is a historical fantasy series which starts out following Breedy, who's a Pictish king. And in comparison to some of Marillier's other work, this is relatively low on the fantasy elements, but it does still include the fair folk and some fantastical elements to it. It is no surprise to me that a Juliet Marillier book ended up on this list. I reread a lot of her books this year. I think I had 8 books that I reread from Juliet Marillier. She's one of my favorite authors, and so it's really no surprise, but this one in particular I just loved. So in this, we are following Breedy. We are following him from a very young age. I think it starts out with him being about 6 years old. He has the potential to become king of the Picts when he grows up, and so there is a druid who is raising him in seclusion, training him to be this great destined king that has been foretold. So in some ways it has a very Arthurian feel to it because he is this like destined king. But when Breedy is about 6 years old, one night he finds a baby girl on their doorstep. Everyone else believes that she is cursed, she's one of the fair folk, and they should leave her there, but Breedy believes that she is someone who is meant to be in his life, and so she takes her in and the two of them grow up together. And so it is following Breedy and this girl Twala as they grow up, Breedy trying to figure out who he is going to be and who he's not going to be, how to become this great king that he is destined to be, and also following Twala figuring out how to find her place in a world where she doesn't really fit in, because she does have connections to the fair folk and she doesn't really fit in with human society, but she is deeply connected to Breedy and will not leave him or the human world behind. So we're following both of these characters as they grow up and find their place in the world. This is definitely a very flawed trilogy. I have a whole trilogy review for this in which I kind of talk more about some of the flaws of it, especially within the romance, but there's something about this book and Juliet Marillier's writing that just, this is an exception to me. Like, am I hypocritical about it? Maybe. There's something about their dynamic that just really worked for me. Juliet Marillier's writing is always so beautiful and engrossing and immersive, so I loved this. It was a wonderful reread to start the year off with, and I'm so glad that I did reread it and rediscover this trilogy. Okay. After that, speaking of Arthurian feels, I guess, we'll go on to Spear by Nicola Griffith. This is a Arthurian adjacent retelling. It is a gender-bent queer retelling of the character of Percival. So we start out following this girl who has grown up in seclusion with her mother and then decides to venture out into the world. She believes that she is meant to be a knight in the world, and so she ventures out. She has taught herself how to fight. She is able to like commune with nature and the wind to help her be a better warrior and fighter. I think what I loved most about this was really the atmosphere of it. I love Nicola Griffith's writing in this, and it had that very magical feeling that I always want out of an Arthurian retelling. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm so glad that I read it, and it has made me more excited about trying other Arthurian retellings, because sometimes they can be hit or miss for me. When they're hits, I love them, but they can also really be misses for me, and this sort of reignited an interest in trying to find more of those Arthurian retellings that are going to be hits for me, because when I love them, and I was so glad to have read this year. And then the last book that I want to talk about is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a fantasy world inspired by the cultures of pre-Columbian America, and we are following multiple perspectives of different characters as they are all converging on the holy city of Tova for this specific foretold celestial event. So it has this real feeling of anticipation as we are following these different characters' perspectives, because they are all moving towards this point but also expecting different things out of it. There are so many things that I loved about this. I love Rebecca Roanhorse's books in general. From what I have read from her, I just always enjoy them, and this was no exception, but I think this might be my favorite thing that I have read from her so far. I love the world that she created in this. The world building that she uses for this is not heavy on exposition. It's not the type of world building where someone just explains how the world works, but I think that she does such a wonderful job of immersing you in the world and the cultures, and just seeing the world through the eyes of these characters, that you get a really strong feel for the world even without having her explain it to you. I loved all of the characters in this. As I said, we had multiple perspectives, and a lot of times with multi-POV books, there's like one that you like better than the others, or like one that you don't like, but I genuinely enjoyed every perspective in this, and every time we switched perspectives, I was sad to let that one go, but then would immediately get immersed in the next perspective. So I enjoyed every single one of them, which is so rare in a multi-POV story. Although I will say that Serapio is my favorite. He is just a terrifying, sweet little bean, and I love him so much, and I just want the world for him, you know? But I absolutely loved this first book. I did read the second book this year as well. I didn't like quite as much as this first one, but I'm really excited to continue on with the series. I think the third book is coming out in 2023, so I'm really excited about that. All right, so those are my best books of 2022. Overall, as I said, it was a really good reading year, and I'm so glad that I got to read and reread all of these, and it's just made me really excited to read more in 2023. So I would love to know, what was your favorite book that you read in 2022? Or if you have read and loved any of these books that were my favorites, I would love to hear anything you want to talk about in the comments. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!